Hello, everyone, and welcome to Statesman's analysis of the 2020 presidential election here on Statesman Soundwave. My name is Raghav Kosa, and I'm the host of this podcast. With me today, I have two other Statesman staffers, Kelly and Dylan. Today, we will be analyzing the presidential election contested between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, in which Biden has emerged victorious. However, this victory will be contested by Trump. We will be going over both candidates, their campaigns, election day itself, and why we believe Biden won the election. Let's get right into it. Dylan, why don't you introduce the candidates for us?
The candidate representing the Republican Party is the current president of the United States, Donald Trump.
Mhm.
He's responsible for the success of the economy, and before he was president, he was a businessman and had no experience in politics at all. And he's also blamed for the results of COVID-19 in America. Going against him and representing the Democratic Party is Joe Biden, who we all know is the former senator of Delaware and vice president under Barack Obama. He proposes a tax plan to put in effect in America and wants to benefit more people with lower incomes.
Yeah, his tax plan is really focused on helping the lower income society of America because that's quite the voter bank for the Democratic Party.
And also, he focuses a lot on the problem of COVID-19 in America, as we all know, is very relevant right now because America is doing very, very bad when it comes to COVID-19 and the amount of cases we have and deaths compared to other countries.
Definitely. And I think Biden's one of his key campaign points was that he'll put an end to COVID-19 and just really focus in on that in this first few months as president. And I think that's really what we'll discuss this later, but really what helped him win this election, given his focus on the pandemic versus what it seemed like Trump really didn't want to tackle COVID-19. He was focused on other stuff like his successes, like the economy and job growth and everything. So the election, before the election, thanks for that. Thanks for the introduction into the candidates, Dylan. But this coming into this election, it's an unprecedented election. I mean, coronavirus happened. It was already going to be a historical election given just the way Trump sort of polarized the country, like for Trump versus people against Trump. So everyone was speaking about will he come back for a second term? Will the Democrats have a solid enough candidate to fight up against Trump? And then we had some interesting debates in this pre-election cycle. So, Kelly, you want to talk about those?
Yeah, as you said, Raghav, the country is currently very polarized. However, I think one thing that all Americans can agree on is the fact that the first debate was a complete disaster. The candidates kept on interrupting each other, and the moderator could not get them under control. And the first debate really didn't reveal any policy from either candidate. However, this slightly improved with their town halls and the third debate.
Yeah, the second debate actually got canceled because Trump contracted COVID-19 and he wasn't willing to do an online debate. And I mean, that would have been interesting watching a debate on Zoom, the moderator just muting everyone. That would have been funny, but that didn't end up happening. But yeah, the third debate really, it seemed it was more level-headed. I felt they weren't really attacking each other. I felt in the first debate, it was just Biden going after Trump, Trump going after Biden. It was getting personal with Trump mentioning members of Biden's family. And I felt that really wasn't as presidential as it should have been, but thankfully it got better by the third debate. But as you said, it really did not have an impact on a lot of people's decisions in this election.
I was about to add on, the debates itself didn't really sway the opinions of voters' minds. Like they made their mind before the debates.
Yeah, I think that's a good point you bring up, though. Coming into this election, there was a small population of neutral voters in comparison to other years. It was people who were either set on Biden or set on Trump. So the debates really couldn't serve its purpose of informing the American people who are neutral in this case, who are bipartisan in understanding, do they want to go blue or do they want to go red? So coming into the election, Kelly, do you want to talk about the polls? Whose favor were they in?
Yeah, seems that Biden was ahead in most polls, and for example, in BBC's poll, it was 50% favored to Biden, 44% to Trump. We'll talk about how this was reflected onto the actual election itself later on, but yeah, Biden held on to a pretty significant lead in the pre-election polls.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say that even like so BBC is obviously a British news source and they also favored Biden. So we tried our best to look for polls that were bipartisan, as well as 270towin.com. It's a source that combines multiple polls from around America, and they also had Biden ahead in most of the key swing states. And those swing states really were important in this election, which we'll be going into later on in our discussion. Dylan, why don't you talk about their campaigns? I felt that they were both unique in their own ways, and they both had their own strengths that they really try to play to during this election.
All right. First, I'm going to talk about Biden's campaigning.
Mm-hmm.
So Biden mainly focused on Pennsylvania, and it was where he mainly spent most of his time on the days leading up to the election.
Mm-hmm.
And however, campaign did rely on technology as a big weapon, like text messages, social media, ads on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was also like Instagram filters, I guess. Like there was
Instagram filters, YouTube
like
ads.
vote
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah, it was definitely, they really used social media and wanted to appeal to the, I feel, younger generation who typically uses social media more. And I think they also went online primarily due to the COVID-19 virus.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Also, Biden had a lot of rallies in the Midwest, and he wanted to focus on the blue wall, which includes Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan,
Mhm.
which is very popular and known as like Democratic states.
Yeah, but
And
in the 2016 election, sorry, Dylan, to interrupt, but Trump had actually taken all three of these states. So Biden really wanted to rebuild this blue wall. I'll be going into that later, but yeah, continue.
and Biden during his rallies encouraged mail-in votes rather than voting in person due to the COVID-19 virus
Mm-hmm.
and the concerns around it.
Definitely.
While Trump, on the other hand, at his rallies, he encourages supporters to vote on election day. Some big places where he rallied at on the final Sunday before the election, Donald Trump rallied at 5 states: Michigan, Iowa, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And even though he lost, he plans to rally again as he pursues legal challenges to the election results. So it just shows like
I
COVID
think,
isn't really as a big deal as him as
yeah, I
Biden's
think,
trying to push it.
right. And he really, Trump, I think his supporters and himself, they really all enjoy the rallies. Like Trump gets a big boost to his confidence by seeing all these people out there sort of chanting his name essentially. And like he really focuses on those. And I mean, credit to him. He's 74 years old, but going to 5 different states, rallying, being
In a
that, having
day.
that same enthusiasm, it really takes a lot of strength and energy. And I think rallies is what really got him his votes in 2016 and what got him close to winning this election this year again. I mean, those rallies really motivate a person if they're influenced by what he says. And
But also, if you're like a neutral person, you see Trump having these rallies with large crowds, and
Mhm.
like with these large crowd, COVID cases tend to increase.
Yeah,
Like it kind of sways like people who are neutrals' minds, and like
def-
what is Trump doing? Like
yeah,
huge crowds.
yeah. Those who like were focusing on like the research of doctors like Dr. Fauci and who were saying avoid large crowds, but all these large crowds you could see. I mean, even there were people wearing masks, but not everyone was wearing masks. So like neutral people would have been like, do we really want to risk our safety? Do we like that our president would risk the safety of his people in order to just rally and get some confidence boost? So that's an interesting point you brought up, Dylan. But now let's get into the actual election. So as we said, this was an unprecedented election. No one thought that a pandemic could absolutely change the whole world, but it ended up doing that. And they implemented the mail-in ballot system. So what this system was the USPS sent out mail-in ballots. You could get mail-in ballots and you had to send them in. Every state had different deadlines. Some states you could send any mail-in ballot sent before November 3rd would be counted if it got to the counting site before November 10th. So it really gave people the opportunity to vote from the comforts of their own home without being scared of getting COVID-19. And as you mentioned before, Biden really encouraged mail-in votes rather than voting in person due to COVID-19 concerns, unlike Trump and the Republicans, who, like in many states, Georgia, Wisconsin, Republican legislator prevented mail-in votes from being counted early, and they wanted people to vote in person because they felt that was a strength for them. But as of Monday, November 2nd, the day before the election, the actual election day, 96 million people had already voted. That's the greatest early voting amount in history, and it just really shows that it's unprecedented times, and this was a historical election, both in the candidate's point of view and just the circumstances. But coming into this election, both parties had their own ideal scenarios. So for Biden, it was essentially to hold the states Hillary had won. Hillary had won some key states such as Nevada, and it was really up to Biden to hold these states because, I mean, Hillary did lose by quite a big margin, but he needed a foundation, and Hillary had built that for him, and he needed to maintain that. But I think the key thing for both key states for both parties coming into the election was winning Florida and Pennsylvania. Those two states really seemed that they could go any way. And Florida always seems like it could go anyway, but Pennsylvania had been red coming into this election, and it really looked like the Democrats were making a push, but no one knew what would happen on election day. But I also think Biden's goal was to rebuild the blue wall, which he ended up doing, which we mentioned before, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And I think that was essential for him because those are states with great amount of electoral votes. Those are key votes that could have gone either way, and they ended up going Biden's way. So that was a scenario that ended up paying off for Biden. Coming into the election for Trump, he also wanted to retain majority of the states he won in 2016. However, he really needed to retained Florida and Pennsylvania, as well as the blue wall. And he only ended up retaining Florida in the end, which was a big loss to him and a big loss to his campaign because they were really pushing in those states. But there was some circumstances, which we'll be discussing later, that really got Biden the win in those states. There were some states that Biden wanted to flip as well, such as Arizona, Iowa, Florida, Pennsylvania, and he ended up getting Arizona and Pennsylvania, again, key electoral college votes. And Trump wanted to flip New Hampshire and Minnesota. Trump campaign attempted pushes in those states. However, they were unsuccessful. However, in my opinion, those weren't the most important states for the Trump campaign because New Hampshire only 4 electoral college votes, Minnesota only 10 in comparison to other more important states. So they both wanted to flip states, and Biden ended up flipping more, as we ended up seeing. But those were the ideal scenarios coming into this election. Now let's talk about election day. So there were many swing states. We'll be going over each one of those and what happened in the election, pre-election, post-election, what happened during. Why did Biden or Trump win those respective states? So Dylan, why don't you start by talking about Nevada?
Okay, Nevada was favored for Biden. Clinton won Nevada in 2016, but Nevada also took the longest to count like all the votes. Still technically counting, however, called for Biden. It was called for Biden.
Yeah, it's been called for Biden by multiple news sources. However, they only still have 88% of the vote in, and Twitter has been ruthless towards Nevada with the slow way they are counting. And I feel bad. There's a guy who comes on TV every day in Clark County who like talks about why it's being so slow, and people keep asking the same questions. And it's just interesting that they're taking so long, given it's a relatively smaller state in comparison to other states that counted significantly faster. I'll take Georgia. So Georgia, again, was one of the biggest states in this election. It has been red for quite a while. The last time it was blue was 1992. In 1996 onwards, it's been red. And again, this was another state where the vote took a while to determine. The voting center in Fulton County, which was the county that includes Atlanta, which is a big Democratic stronghold, they had a pipe burst in their counting center, and that really delayed the vote. But it eventually went blue, which was a big surprise to the whole nation and really what gave Biden the win because of Democratic efforts in the Atlanta metro, as well as mail-in ballots. Mail-in ballots that came in late were key for Biden's victory, and the votes that they got in the Atlanta metro, it was almost an 80-20 percentage difference. So Biden had 80% in the Atlanta area and Trump at 20%. And Atlanta has most of the people in Georgia. And their pushes in those areas, whether it was sports teams, so the Atlanta Hawks, the Atlanta Braves, they were all pushing people in the city to vote. And like, as we said before, the online aspect of their campaigns really helped them get that win in Georgia and was a big state for Biden to win. Kelly, why don't you talk about Texas?
Yeah, so Texas is typically considered to be a Republican stronghold. However, coming into this election, it started to be considered to be a swing state due to Democratic pushes in big metro areas. It initially looked blue. However, more rural counties started counting their votes, and Texas eventually turned red and it stayed red. It would have been a luxury for Biden to win, but he ultimately didn't need it as he had enough electoral votes to win the presidency.
Yeah, definitely. Like Texas, I mean, if it had turned blue, I think that would have been a big shock to the whole world, given
Yeah,
it's always seen as a big Republican stronghold. And the Democrats have been pushing, and like given the diversity increasing in Texas, and especially the Latino community in San Antonio, Houston, Austin, Dallas, so the big metros, that really could have helped the Democrats win. However, as we said, the rural counties, given how big Texas is, really swung it Trump's way. Dylan, why don't you talk about arguably one of the most important states in this election, Florida?
okay. Typically, Florida has been known to be red. However, many polls favor Biden by 2.7% more than Trump.
Hmm.
But like looking closer, Biden lost key votes in Miami-Dade County because Trump appealed to the Cuban community in those counties in Florida.
Hmm.
And we all thought initially like the state would determine the election, but it ended up
Even
Trump's
though,
favor. Trump's
yeah, even though Trump won it, it didn't really matter given Biden's win in Biden wins in more states that we didn't think he would win in, such as Georgia and Pennsylvania. But yeah,
yeah,
Dylan, that you brought up a good point. I think Biden losing votes in the Miami-Dade County really cost him Florida. Like he lost votes that Hillary had gotten, and I think it's so the Cuban community. They've been against communism. They all immigrated to Florida because of the communism in Cuba. And Trump would always call Biden a socialist, call Kamala a socialist. And that really didn't stick with too many people. It must have stuck with the Cubans in Miami-Dade, which ended up costing Biden Florida. I'll talk about North Carolina. Pre-election, it was considered one of the most important swing states, and it was really close. Only 0.3% favored towards Biden, and it initially looked blue. The Democratic Party was celebrating. However, again, as more rural counties started counting, it turned red, and that swung it towards Trump. And again, it was another state that really didn't matter in the end, given Biden's victories in other states. Kelly, why don't you talk about Pennsylvania? Again, one of the most important states in this election.
Yeah, so along with Florida, Pennsylvania was considered a major swing state that could swing the election towards either candidate. And this was considered part of the blue wall that had been destroyed by Trump. And by the end of the election, this Pennsylvania had favored Biden by 3.7%. Although it was initially red until the second day of the election, mail in ballots started coming in from Philadelphia and it ultimately turned towards Biden. As Dylan mentioned earlier, Biden really pushed for those mail in ballots. So that was a huge victory for him when those mail in ballots started coming in from Philadelphia, a metro area, as Raghav has said before.
Mhm. Yeah, the metros really are crucial for the Democratic Party, and it seems like in all of the recent elections, it's what really swings it towards the eventual wins for the Democrats. Dylan, why don't you talk about Wisconsin?
Wisconsin was a state also part of the broken blue wall, like the blue wall that Trump destroyed in the
Mhm.
2016 election. So this time Biden pushed heavily to campaign in Wisconsin and all the states around that area, the blue wall. And at first, Wisconsin was clearly looking red. However, as time went on, as more mail-in ballots came in, Biden took the lead. The fact that Biden was able to rebuild the blue wall was probably one of the main reasons he won the election this year.
Definitely.
But now Trump wants to recount the ballots and sue the counties in Wisconsin.
Yeah, Trump really feels he should have gotten Wisconsin, and I think it's because of the mail-in ballots that like came in overnight, it seems, and really swung it towards Biden. Here, I'll take the last two swing states, Michigan and Arizona. So Michigan, the third state in the blue wall, was again one of the key states for Biden. He was favored to win by 5.4%. Yet it was another state that looked red throughout the election night. And as mail-in ballots came in the next day, it again tilted towards Biden. And three states, the three states of the blue wall, all had mail-in ballots come in on the second day and tilted towards Biden, which is really interesting in this election, given it was just out of the blue that the blue party won in the end, that they got all these mail-in ballots, and it really shows how the Biden campaign was pushing for more mail-in ballots, while Trump's campaign was really looking for the in-person vote to win them the election. And the last swing state I'll be talking about is Arizona, another state that's been traditionally red, but due to a growing and diverse population in the Phoenix metro, it looked to be blue, and Biden was favored to win by 2.2% coming into the election. And it looked blue right from the start as counting began. Given the fact that Arizona started counting mail-in ballots and election day ballots at the same time, it looked blue from the start and has stayed blue and was called for Biden. And I think this was one of the biggest swings for the Democrats because it was initially a Republican stronghold, Arizona, but as I said, due to a more diverse population, it really swung it towards Biden's.
And
Towards Biden.
regarding
Yeah, go ahead.
regarding Arizona, like throughout these years, probably a lot of Californians have like moved to Arizona. I
Definitely.
think that's one of the main reasons Arizona turned blue, because California is like mainly known as a blue state.
Yeah,
Always
California.
has been.
Yeah, always has. No, this is another thing you brought up. It's a good point you brought up because a lot of Californians have been moving to Texas as well. I mean, I think a reason behind that is because there's no state taxes in Texas, and California is outrageous with its taxes. But they also bring their democratic beliefs with them, which ended up making Texas even being considered a swing state, which is never thought of before, given how much of a stronghold it was for the Republicans. But yeah, so that's how Election Day went. So now let's really analyze why we think Biden won this election. So I think as of election night, I don't know if you guys were watching it go down, but it really looked like a clear win for Trump, right?
Yeah, all the major news sources was like, I remember going to like before I went to bed,
Mhm.
watching Fox News, and the broadcaster was like, "Yeah, this looks like a clear win for Trump. I don't know how Biden's gonna come back from this."
And
And then
then
the next day, they counted
next
all the
morning,
mail-in ballots.
yeah,
Biden came back.
the next morning we all woke up. Biden got more and more votes. The mail-in ballots, I think, really gave Biden the win. Democrats encouraged mail-in ballots. Republicans urged to vote in person. They belittled the USPS. Trump was constantly after them, saying that the election will be rigged. The USPS isn't good. They were considering cutting funding, and they really made it tough to get those mail-in ballots in. But it still ended up winning Biden this election. And there are still some states counting votes, like Pennsylvania and Nevada, but it still seems like Biden will win this election. Um, Kelly, what do you think about Biden really helped him win this election? Like, what are some of his values and stuff that really appealed to the people?
Yeah, so I think Biden's empathy and stability was seen as very desired characteristics after I would say a relative disorganization of the Trump administration, especially in this COVID-19 pandemic. Many Americans thought that the Trump administration had mishandled it and that he didn't have a full control over it. Additionally, he had a great online campaign as well, like as you mentioned before, encourage mail-in ballots, which helped the American people adjust to the COVID-19 pandemic during this election.
Definitely. And I think another key thing is like, unlike 2016, where Trump's like his attack mindset, where he would just go after Hillary with like Twitter, calling her Crooked Hillary. This time when he called Joe Biden Sleepy Joe, when he attacked Hunter Biden with the supposed email scandal and everything, it really didn't stick this time because America, as you said, Kelly, was looking for stability and just, relative peace after what has been a very just chaotic period during
2020.
COVID-19. Yeah, 2020, it's just been an interesting year with a lot that's happened. And I think people just wanted relative peace that they wouldn't have really gotten with Trump, given his mindset of really attacking others and just being a bit cynical in comparison to other presidential candidates. Dylan, do you have any points you would like to share, or should we move on to our next
I was
point?
gonna add,
Yeah.
Biden's very like clear in his speeches. Like,
Mhm.
he's not a president for just Democrats. Now,
Yeah.
like he's he's a president for all of the American people.
Yeah.
As of Trump, like during his presidency, during the COVID cases, he attacked blue states for not handling COVID well, and like cases increased in blue states more than they did in red states.
Yeah. I agree. I think Biden is always clear that I'm not going to be a president for the Democratic people. I'm going to be a president for the American people, which is something that I don't think Trump said. Trump would always favor his people, his supporters. And while that makes sense, you're trying to appeal to your supporters. I think Biden did a good job of uniting the nation, even without being president, which is something the country desperately needs at this moment, in my opinion. Kelly, why don't you talk about the future impact of this election? With Biden winning this election, what's going to happen for America?
Yeah, so on Saturday, November 7th, Biden made his victory speech where he laid out some of his key policies and plans for the future of this nation, where he emphasized the need for unity, as Raghav you have said that Biden wants to unify the country. And he said, if we can decide not to cooperate, then we can decide to cooperate, which I think is a key value in the Biden administration that was previously missing in the Trump administration. He has also emphasized the importance of controlling the coronavirus. Yeah, on Monday, November 9th, Biden announced his COVID-19 task force chaired by former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, a former Food and Drug Administration Commissioner David Kessler, and Yale University's Dr. Marcella Nunes-Smith. One slightly controversial nominee to this task force was a Trump administration whistleblower, Rick Bright, which shows how the Biden administration differs from the Trump administration in the fact that they are more willing to listen to science. In more future plans, Biden wants to reverse and update many policies taken by the Trump administration, especially in immigration and foreign policy. Especially for foreign policy, Biden would like to rebuild relations with other democratic nations and expand human rights, as well as tackle climate change.
Yeah, one point, probably to butt in, but one point I would like to bring up is I think Trump really took steps to removing himself from a lot of global organizations such as the Paris Climate Accord, the World Health Organization. I think Biden has already said the first thing I'm going to do on my first day as president is rejoin both the WHO and the Paris Climate Accord because he believes those are really important for the safety and security of America in the future in a climate and medical sense, because those are, I think, the two biggest problems that plague America. Not any warfare with other countries as it was in the past, but fighting the climate change and fighting medical novelties such as the COVID-19 virus.
So while on the multilateral front, Biden seems to have it covered. Domestic policies will have to depend on the Senate, on the future of the Senate. So there are still two more Georgia runoff elections that are set for January, and the GOP has gained a lot of seats in the House, more than news outlets have projected. So Biden may have to refrain from pushing certain policies such as healthcare and the environment and focus more on issues with potential bipartisan support, such as coronavirus relief and infrastructure. Biden would also like to reform police, as well as enact more criminal justice reform. Lastly, Biden would like to reform healthcare with the Affordable Care Act. However, his plans will have to depend on the outcome of Trump's case, as he is challenging Obamacare in the Supreme Court. Another back burner policy for the Biden administration is education. So while Biden does want to make education more accessible, it has to be put on hold for the moment because of more pressing issues such as the pandemic.
Definitely. I think you brought up some good points about his policies and how both domestic and international policies will be crucial on those runoff elections in the Senate, because I think whoever wins those two Georgia Senate seats will end up giving the majority to either party in the Senate. And that will be crucial for Biden if he really wants to get change done in this, in his administration. And another thing I would like to bring up that you mentioned, like reforming the police, the Affordable Care Act. Like in the first place, the reason that Biden got the Democratic ticket was that he wasn't being extreme. As you mentioned before, he was looking for stability and he was really being like a cooperative and unifying person. He doesn't want to go to the extremes. Like some of the Democratic candidates or nominees, such as Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, they were all looking for revolutionary change, like having extremely different healthcare plans. But Biden just wanted to reform plans already set in place that have been working and just make them a bit better and a bit suited better for the American public. Yeah, and
also,
with that, go ahead.
I think that plays into like also like swaying some like Republicans' minds if they like just like regret voting for Trump in 2016 and they're like, you know, something like all this chaos happening in 2020.
Yeah.
Like Biden isn't really like an extreme leftist. He's not like a socialist as Trump like would say. He's like a left-leaning centralist, really. And
Definitely.
he has some Democrat ideas and maybe some Republican ideas too.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The big reason why Biden won the Democratic bid was because he was always at the center of his party. He never leaned too far to the center or too far to the right or too far to the left. He was always a moderate Democrat, and that's what got him both Democratic and Republican votes this election.
Definitely. Yeah, so these are some great points you guys brought up. But with that, we would like to conclude our analysis of the 2020 presidential election. We hope you were able to gain a further understanding of this historical election through our podcast. Stay tuned for future podcasts similar to this one, specifically analyzing relevant and important news around the world. Also, make sure to check out our Instagram page at AESHS Statesman, as well as our website, statesmanshs.org, to find all of the content our staff puts out. That's all for now. Thank you.